It's over. They're all gone. Frank, it's time. It's time you say what happened.
The Irishman, y el título en español es El Irlandés, una película de Netflix que ya está en cines también, y está en cines por supuesto porque es una de las principales expectativas, las principales contrincantes que van a estar pues viéndose cara a cara en el Oscar, una de las películas que se espera esté con muchas nominaciones el próximo año. La historia se centra en el asesino a sueldo Frank Sheeran, conocido como The Irishman, el irlandés, interpretado por Robert De Niro, quien en su lecho de muerte confesó haber cometido el asesinato no resuelto del líder sindical estadounidense Jimmy Hoffa por orden del mafioso Russell Bufalino. Tenemos hoy con nosotros en la charla a Charles Chamales, productor de esta gran película. Charles, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, thank you.
Esta historia comienza hace muchísimos años atrás y creo que hay que darle las gracias a tu esposa.
That's absolutely right, Daniela. My wife was at the Sun Valley Writers Conference in 2006.
Hawaii.
And she heard the author, Charles Brandt, who wrote the book I Heard You Paint Houses, which the film The Irishman is based on.
Exactly.
And the title, I Heard You Paint Houses, comes from when a mob guy whacks a guy. He splatters blood on the wall. He paints the house.
Oh, so it's a code for the mafia.
Yes.
Es un código para la mafia. Mira eso.
Yes.
Wow, how interesting.
Yes. And in fact, when Jimmy Hoffa was first introduced to the central character, Frank the Irishman Sheeran.
That's true. That's what he says.
First words out of his mouth were, I hear you paint houses. Mm-hmm. And Frank Sheeran said, Mr. Hoffa, I not only paint houses, I do my own carpentry, which means he gets rid of the bodies.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember that phrase. I loved it. I love that scene.
It's a really marvelous scene in the film. And so my wife was at the Sun Valley Writers Conference in Sun Valley, Idaho, and she heard the author speak. She was so impressed with him that she canceled her next lecture and saw him do his second talk, his breakout talk. And she was really impressed with his story about how he wrote this book, how he met Frank the Irishman Sheeran, how he got him out of jail on a parole, a medical parole. And the author, Charles Brandt, who wrote this brilliant book, I Heard You Paint Houses, was the former Deputy Attorney General of Delaware. He was a former homicide investigator, a prosecutor. He was a former welfare fraud investigator, a former English school teacher. So he had a very interesting history. Wow. And he was able to extract these confessions out of Frank Sheeran, which ultimately became the book, I Heard You Paint Houses. And so she gave me a copy of the book. I read the book in a weekend, and I was so impressed.
Fell in love with it. Te enamoraste del libro.
Yeah, I fell in love with it. I said, this is an unbelievable book. So as I fondly say, this project for me was born under a lucky star. Because my wife and I, after I read the book, were walking by the bookstore in Sun Valley, Idaho, called Chapter 1.
Did that happen the same week?
That happened a few weeks later.
Okay.
A few weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
And in the window of the Chapter 1 bookstore was the book, I Heard You Paint Houses, featured in the window. And so we know Gerald Chamales, who owns the bookstore. So we went in and I said, Cheryl, this is an unbelievable book. I just read it. I Heard You Paint Houses. And she said, do you know the author, Charles Brandt? I said, no. She said, just a minute. He lives right here in Ketchum. She had him on speed dial. She hit the number. He picked up. She said, Charlie, I have some people here that are interested in your book. Let me introduce you to my friend, Gerald Chamales. I picked up the phone. I said, Mr. Brandt, I just read your book. It's magnificent. The author, Charles Brandt, replied, where are you? I said, I'm at Chapter 1. He said, don't move. I'm coming over.
Estaba escrito en las estrellas. Ese era tu destino.
I think you're right, because it was so amazing because he came over, the author of this incredible book, which has great historical significance in America because it solved one of the great mysteries, what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Yes. And Jimmy Hoffa was the president of the Teamsters Union and was in the 50s as famous as Elvis Presley. In the 60s, he was as famous as the Beatles. He was the most powerful man in America next to the president of the United States because he controlled the Teamsters Union, the Teamsters Pension Fund, which lent money to the mobsters. This is how the mobsters got involved to open the casinos in Vegas, etc. So when we were sitting with him, Daniela, for 3 hours at the bookstore,
what a delight must that be, right?
It was fantastic. And I said, by the way, who has the movie rights to this book? He said, we still have the rights. I could not believe that no one had optioned this material. Now, I'm not, at that point, I was not a movie producer.
Quiero que nos detengamos ahí porque es una parte muy importante de la historia. Tú no tenías ninguna experiencia como productor y no habías hecho otra, no estabas en este mundo de lo que es producir películas.
Well, it was, having spent many years in Los Angeles, I did know people in the industry.
Oh, of course you know people, right?
Yes, and Jake Bloom, who was an instrumental part of this story, was one of the great entertainment attorneys and a friend of ours from Sun Valley in Los Angeles. And so when Charlie told me that he still had the rights to the book, I immediately, like a duck on a June bug, I said, my goodness, I must try to convince him to let me option the book. So I came back to Los Angeles, I hired an attorney, and I said to Charlie, give me a chance. I will option the material. I'll have you write the script. So I put together a nice financial package for him to be the screenwriter and a 3-year option. And then I started pounding the pavement, trying to get the studios interested in The Irishman.
Ahora, yo quiero saber cómo en esos 3 años tú llegas a tener a Robert De Niro, llegas a tener a Joe Pesci y llegas a tener también a Al Pacino. Es que eso en 3 años casi no se consigue.
Well, Daniela, what happened was I went to Warner Brothers and the different studios just doing the next indicated action to try to drum up interest in the project.
Yes.
The script wasn't done yet. About a year and a half into it, I said to myself, I better get moving. Because in a year and a half, my option will expire and I will have to turn everything back over to Charles Brandt. So Jake Bloom, who we knew socially, I said, I'm going to call my friend Jake, who's a great entertainment lawyer who's represented Bruce Willis, Jerry Bruckheimer, George Lucas, all the majors in Hollywood, Sylvester Stallone.
Wow.
And we know him socially, so I called. I said, I need your advice. Can I come see you at your office in Beverly Hills? He said, sure, come by. So that was on a Friday. I came by to visit him on a Monday. I said, I have this fabulous material. It solves the Jimmy Hoffa mystery. It also solves other homicides that were unsolved. The Joey Gallo hit at Umberto's Steakhouse in Lower Manhattan, and other crimes. I said, it's an incredible, true Americana story that deserves the best of the best. And he said to me, well, let's see how Charlie does on the script. And if he does a good script, I can probably sell it to Jerry Bruckheimer. Maybe I can sell it to Graham King, some of these other big producers. Let's see how he does. Now, here's a miraculous thing that happened, Daniela. This was on a Monday. On a Wednesday, 2 days later, Jake gets a call from Robert De Niro. And they're discussing a project. And then De Niro, out of the blue, says, yeah, Jake, we're trying to find out who has the movie rights to the book I Heard You Paint Houses.
No, you're kidding me. Eso no pasa en la vida real. These things don't happen just like that.
And I went from friend to client in a nanosecond. Jake said, my client, Gerald Chamales, he has the rights. And Danielle, I think at that moment, it was an explosive moment because this affirmed Robert De Niro's instincts, because with Jake Bloom having the client, he knew that he could get a deal done. And Jake was a very highly respected entertainment lawyer.
Definitely.
So from that moment, we then began to negotiate with Tribeca, with Robert De Niro and Jane Rosenthal, who's Robert De Niro's partner at Tribeca. And we partnered with them. And then Robert De Niro and Jane Rosenthal brought in Martin Scorsese. Then they brought in Steve Zalian to write a script, which was done quite rapidly, maybe within 6 or 7 months. They didn't want to see my script because they wanted to bring in their team, which I totally understand.
Sí.
And then they brought in Al Pacino, Joe Pesci, Harvey Keitel, all these marvelous artists, and Emma Tillinger-Koskoff, who is the head of production for Sequelia, which is Martin Scorsese's company, just did a magnificent job as really the producer, and then we have the legendary producer Irwin Winkler and other producers on the project. So I am just pinching myself to be a part of this incredible project.
Now, I'm not going to get into the, old, this cheap guru spirituality thing. I'm not doing that. No me quiero poner ahora a filosofar espiritualidad ni hacerme de gurú. Pero, Gerald, esas cosas no pasan así nomás. Entonces, yo quisiera saber cuál era tu energía, tu disposición, la mentalidad que tenías en ese momento. ¿Cómo atraes esas cosas tan fácilmente? Tiene que haber algo allí.
Well, that's a very good question because life is a mental game. What I think about and what I act upon is what manifests in my life. So I must constantly be vigilant in thinking constructively, thinking positively, and cultivating belief and faith. When I involved myself with this project, I believed, I had a burning desire and a belief that I think I may have been guided by some mystical forces because this is a fairy tale that became real. How can a first-time producer end up with these great artists? And I believe that there were some mystical forces guiding me because it was like winning the lottery in the world of cinema. To have Martin Scorsese, who I believe is the Leonardo da Vinci of cinema, these great artists, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino, who are so gifted. And by the way, Daniela, they have been so kind to me, very inclusive. Jane Rosenthal, Emma Tillinger-Koskoff, Martin Scorsese, they've included me in the readings and the set, and it's just been a marvelous journey. So in answer to your question, I believe that we can attract life's lucky breaks, or you can repel life's lucky breaks. I think having this material was somehow maybe this law of attraction, because Robert De Niro was given the book by Eric Roth when he was working on a project called Frankie, The Winter of Frankie the Machine. It was a mob movie that he and Scorsese were going to make.
They did.
And they decided once Robert De Niro read the book, I Heard You Paint Houses, he decided he wanted to do that rather than the other project, which is very unusual because he took a greenlit movie and turned it into a development deal so he could do this movie, which is unbelievable.
Wow. Tú tenías este deseo fijo, tenías esta pasión por este deseo y también tenías certeza, no tenías miedo, no dudabas. No fear.
Yeah.
Also.
Well, I had a little bit of fear because I'd put a considerable amount of money into it, so it propelled me. Now, the law of attraction...
A pesar de ese miedo, ¿cómo es que atraes esto? A mí me gusta saber eso.
Well, the law of attraction only works with action. You have to be into action. Faith without works is dead. So faith must be coupled with action or nothing happens. It's a fantasy if I just think about it.
Exactly.
You have to think about it, but then you have to act on it and take the next indicated action and strive to reach the goal, which for me, I always, even though I had anxiety because I had put in significant money to option it and it was a speculation on my part, I always believed that something great was going to happen because the material warranted the best of the best to be involved. That it landed on Robert De Niro's desk and Jane Rosenthal, and they brought in these mega, incredible artists, Martin Scorsese and the whole team, is just fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. But I always believed the material warranted the best of the best, and it turned out beyond my wildest imagination in terms of the outcome. It's just extraordinary.
Dices que te sorprende que pues Al Pacino y Robert De Niro te hayan tratado como familia. Lo que yo he aprendido en 20 años de carrera entrevistando a todas estas celebridades es que cuanto más grande eres, realmente más humildes son, ¿no? Con los pies sobre la tierra después de haber tenido este éxito de tantos años.
Yeah, they have been, Daniela, they have just been extraordinary, kind, considerate. When my wife and I went to the set and visited with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, they were gracious, kind, inclusive. And in 2015, I get a call from Jane Rosenthal. Hey, this was before we had it financed, before we knew that this film was going to be greenlit. We're having a reading. I want you, you're a stakeholder, Jerry. I want you to be at the reading. So I said, absolutely.
That is so nice.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And they just have been fantastic. And another thing I'm really grateful for is that Jake Bloom, some people, if they would have had the rights, they might have screwed it up. They might have alienated. I just said, look, I said to Jake, if Bob De Niro and Jane Rosenthal want to participate in this project, I said, do everything in your power to close the deal with them. They would be the best partners in the world. And they turned out to be the absolute best.
¿Cuánto ha pasado desde que todo este sueño empezó, no?
Well, literally, for my wife and I, it started in 2006. So 13 years from the beginning until we released the movie this year.
Es un film extraordinario. ¿Qué sentiste cuando lo viste?
Oh, my God. Well, having read the book numerous times and knowing the story about Frank the Irishman Sheeran, they did such a magnificent... Martin Scorsese is so brilliant. In fact, before I ever got involved, Daniela, my 4 favorite movies of all time were Martin Scorsese movies. Goodfellas, Casino, The Departed, Raging Bull. I was always a huge fan of Martin Scorsese and his storytelling. So when I saw the movie, it's really an existential meditation on life, on friendship, on love, on loyalty, on betrayal, on living a life of crime and how that all ended up at the end of their lives, and about power and the abuse of power. And the way the story is told so brilliantly, and with the reversed aging so they could all play the roles in the 50s and 60s, fantastic, it's wonderful.
The reverse aging is one of the most amazing things. Me encanta eso de cuando ellos están jóvenes y los puedes ver, es increíble. Viendo la película y también leyendo el libro, ¿cuál crees que son los paralelos a los momentos que estamos viviendo hoy en día?
Well, I mean, people that live a life of crime, as these characters do in the film and in real life, they solve their problems in the mafia not with negotiation, but with violence. And so to see where these people end up with the violent end of Jimmy Hoffa's life, because he could not listen to the reality of the situation that he had put himself into, and that Frank Sheeran at the end of his, this was his best friend, Jimmy Hoffa, to be put in a situation where he had to murder his best friend, and the guilt and the shame that he felt for the balance of his life is really tragic, and it's very unfortunate. But these individuals, most of them really died with very little. They died in jail and died with very little left. Look at the price Frank Sheeran paid with his daughters. Peggy would not see him for the rest of his life. You know?
Yeah, she didn't want anything to do with her, with him, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we see it with different mafias nowadays, but I think, it's the same. Yeah. And we don't seem to learn the lesson. No. It's always this greed for power and money, but then at the end there's absolutely nothing.
Yeah, for many of these people, they really ended up with nothing. So that's why it's important to live a positive, compassionate life, and stay clear of the mafia.
That's for sure. Estamos hablando de que pues es la primera vez que produces una película, pero me gustaría que nuestra audiencia en la charla sepa a qué te has dedicado toda tu vida, porque eres un hombre sumamente exitoso.
Well, thank you very much, Daniela. Actually, in my early life, I had many struggles, a lot of suffering. My parents divorced when I was 2. I was put into a foster home in Pacoima in the Valley.
What?
Until I was 8 years old. My father was a World War II hero in the OSS. He wrote 2 novels that were made into motion pictures. One was called Never So Few with Frank Sinatra, Steve McQueen, Gina Lollobrigida, Peter Lawford. And his second book called Go Naked in the World was also made into an MGM film with Tony Franciosa, Ernest Borgnine, and Gina Lollobrigida. But I never knew my father because my parents divorced when I was very young, and we ended up seeing him only a couple of times, and then he tragically died at the age of 35. So my early life was filled with poverty and fear and anxiety and not having a father. So I had to get my life back together again. When I was 26, I started to focus on rebuilding my life and being the best person that I could be. So then at that point, I started to work on entrepreneurship. I started my own company, and we built it up. It was called Rhinotech Computer Products, and we had at one point 750 employees. And so we built it up, and then I sold those companies in 2006, which opened up the opportunity for me to become a producer and experiment with new business opportunities, such as making the investment in optioning this material. So I've had many challenges in life, and I believe that my head is bloody but unbowed. It's like the William Henley poem Invictus. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. So I've worked very hard to stay focused on my direction and my goals, and I believe that we all are essentially the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of our lives, and even if we've been dealt a difficult hand, we got to play it to the best of our ability and keep going forward with positive action and optimism.
Gracias por esta entrevista tan fascinante, Gerald Chamales. See you at the Oscars.
I hope so.
Please stop by and say hello.
I will. Thank you so much, Danielle.
I know things they don't know I know.
He said that? You sure he said that?
I'm worried nobody threatens Arthur. I got records, I got tapes. They're done.
I had to put you into this thing.
Sooner or later, everybody put here as a date when he's gonna go.